Yeah, it's your boy Mark B, and you are listening to another episode of the Man Listen Show. We live. You asked for it, and we doing it. Go ahead and introduce the crew. Arika, what's up with you?
Hey, everybody.
Lab, what's up, bro?
What's going on, man? What's going on?
All right. And C, last but not least, C, how you doing, sister?
Hey, what's good?
Doing good, doing good, doing good. So before we get started, let's go ahead and shout out everything. Make sure that you like the chat, like the show on YouTube. Go to our social media. You can follow us on Facebook. You can follow us on Instagram. You can follow us on Twitter at Man Listen Show. We need to up our likes, and family, we need your help. So share the show. If you want to listen to the show, you can listen to us on SoundCloud. You can subscribe to the Man Listen Show on Apple iTunes. You can listen to us on Google Play. And of course, you can hear us on YouTube. So make sure that you follow us, help us out. All the likes that we get really help the show, helps us grow the show. And we appreciate the support. So today, we're going to talk about a heavy topic. We're going to talk about something that's been all over social media, When They See Us, the brand new miniseries by Ava DuVernay. A lot of people were talking about it, and the thought process that kept going back and forth between everybody was, am I able to even watch this? We as a Man Listen crew decided that we wanted to talk about this topic. And, you know, as the head brother in charge, I made the decision that if people weren't able to complete it, I understood. I felt it was my obligation to power through it and to watch it. It was beautifully made. It was powerful. It should win every single award that it's eligible to win. But watching it really was at times disturbing, at times moving, and then there was times where you felt hope and then you saw it snatched away. So we're going to talk about it. We're going to talk about the emotions that were elicited by this miniseries, what we thought about it, and why it's just important for us to continue to have stories like this. So, you know, I'm going to start off with my brother. And usually it's ladies first, but I'm going to start off with my brother, Lav. Lav, first of all, let me ask you this. Did you finish the show? And if you finished it, what were your initial thoughts after completing When They See Us?
I was able to finish, save for 20 minutes of the final episode 4. I was able to watch it. Initially, once I got done with it, the last impact, or the last thing you see, is always most impactful. And that episode 4 to me was kind of like, wow, how oftentimes our people are failed by the justice system, by elected officials, people that are supposed to protect and serve the communities. And what they end up doing a lot of times is actually harming them. And man, I was thinking about it. What he went through, basically, he has PTSD. And I was wondering, you know, when you're a soldier and you're overseas, you go through it and they have counseling and everything like that for you when you get back. Most normal.
You talking about Corey Wise?
Yeah, Corey Wise.
Talking about Corey Wise?
Corey Wise, right. Okay. And so, you know, when you're overseas, you know, he's seen worse than what a lot of people that have PTSD overseas fighting have seen, right? So I wonder, are they paying for him? I know he got a settlement, but there should have been some kind of something done for all them guys and their family members and everything like that. And really not even family members, just anybody associated with the case. There really should be some kind of mental health counseling, as we talk about a lot. That's something that is not nearly as prevalent as it should be.
Well, I think that I strongly doubt that they got any additional sort of resources or help from the city of New York. I know that they fought a good long time to try to get paid for the time that they served unjustly. You know, even though they were exonerated, the city, the people that were involved, the police officers that were involved, the attorneys that were involved, hell, I mean, even Donald Trump, they still believe that those men were involved when they were young boys in the park. And the problem with that is, you know, they're defiant. And it wasn't until Mayor de Blasio was put into office and he campaigned on it. He campaigned on, you know, we want to settle the case for the Central Park Five. So I doubt that they got that treatment, like you said, but it's very, very warranted. The one thing I disagree with you on, I do think the family needed that as well, because I thought they did a good job of showing how the family was affected, how
Right.
they were
No, that's what
made
I was.
pariahs because, yeah, they were made pariahs
Yeah.
because their sons were allegedly these animals that were
Right.
wilding in the
Right.
park and raped this white woman. You know what I'm
Right.
saying? So Rick, I'm gonna go ahead and bring you in. Were you able to watch it? Did you finish it? What'd you think?
No. My first attempt, I made it 10 minutes. My second attempt, I made it 10 or 15 more minutes. And my third attempt, I think we made it kind of far in my mind, but I never made it past the point where they were about to interrogate the boys, which was difficult for me to watch at the various stages. Um, I thought that it was heartbreaking. Like from the very beginning, like I was like very, very personally affected by what happened. And I don't think I could make it to the end. I think it's worth making it to the end because I think that Ava DuVernay has like a gift for like capturing people and making various audiences see us where society has tried numerous times to not see us as humans or as people. And I think that she has captured that beautifully. She's had my attention since the opening scene of Salem when those, poor little girls was killed. So I think that she has a gift that is a little too real for
Yeah,
me,
right.
which
You
is
know
not a bad thing.
the thing about it was when I started the first episode and you talked about like the first 10 minutes, they did a good job of capturing the time frame. And I remember being a young man growing up in Topeka, Kansas, and hearing the stories. I remember when they said wilding. I don't know, Lab, you remember it. They were talking about young black people wilding. It was this thing where young
Yep.
black kids go out to the park and they go out and they wild out. It's like that knockout game that people talk about that we as young black men we do, and it's all this. It's just another ploy to dehumanize us and to make us seem less than human and to make us basically easier to brutalize, easier to kill, easier to incarcerate unjustly, like they did to Central Park Five. So when they talked about wilding, when they talked about the Central Park Five, I remember being a young man and hearing that story. And I remember my mother asked me, like, "Do you know anything about this wilding?" And I was just a kid, like these kids were. And I'm like, no, I don't know what you're talking about. And to see them in the police station being coerced, being taken advantage of, and not just them, but seeing their parents, the ones that did have parents who did try to help them, seeing their vulnerability due to lack of wealth, poverty, like, well, hey, I got to go to work. I'm saying he'll be okay. I'll come back. And then he comes back hours later, and his son has been in this interrogation room, basically being tortured. And the thing that really shook me was that just by the grace of God, that wasn't me. That could have been that could have been me, that could have been any of my friends. And to your point, Enrica, she did a wonderful job of making that real. And it brought back those emotions that I had at the time, hearing about these young men going to jail, even when I was young and I wasn't able to process how severe it was for them. So, see, were you able to watch it?
I was not. I attempted to, like, well, I'm not even gonna say I attempted to. I kept saying, okay, I'm gonna watch it this day at this time. And then I put it off and I'm gonna watch it this day at this time. And I just couldn't. Honestly, that is, outside of having to, bury or losing a child, that is my greatest fear. Is that one of my kids or one of the young black men that, I love will be like wrongly convicted. I've actually, seen it happen, not to that extent, but I've seen, situations where young black men, were arrested or even sent to jail just under false pretense. So I mean, I can't do it. I do think that I am going to give it a try later this week. it just probably wasn't a good idea for me to do it right before a work week. Like I need a couple of days to kind of decompress. I can't like watch it and then go to work Monday morning and snap about the wrong thing. You
Yeah,
know, I
it's
still need my job.
it's sort of like when I was in high school. When I was in high school, diversity was definitely not my high school strong suit. If you catch my drift, so whenever February came along and it was Black History Month and they would show Roots, I was like, you know what, I'm gonna go ahead and tap out on this one because I don't need to go to school and flip out on the first person that says something crazy or does something unknowingly to trigger me and they like, well, what the heck's wrong with this young man? And he just got through watching Roots. Oh, okay. So, but that leads to the next question. Why do you think it's important for us to continue to tell stories like this? I mean, this is a very, very tough story to watch. I mean, it was, we talked about it last week with Dr. Camille LaFleur, that there's certain stories that we need to just tap out from. We need to not watch. We need to protect our mental health. We need to protect our peace. But these stories deserve to be told, and we need to continue to make them. So how do we go forward with supporting stories like this, supporting the Black actors, the Black people in production, everybody that went into making this film? How do we support them and still protect our mental health and our peace? Go ahead, Arika.
I think we do it in pieces. Like, even though I couldn't get through more than 10 minutes at a time, I keep fighting through. And I mean, you do it at your own pace, at your own speed, and you do it in a way that's, okay for you, because only you can tell what's okay for you. But I think it's important to do it because, like you said, we have to support them and we have to tell these stories, because without these stories, the society at large will continue to forget that these are not the Central Park Five, these or the Central Park 4+1. These are actual little
Hey,
children.
Lab, mute your feedback, Lab.
These are actual children that were.
Hold on. Now this, hey, we live and we thugging it. So this, things happening. We just gonna push through it. So, our teammate DJ Lav tried to add something to the mix like he normally does, but mute your feedback, dog. Mute your feedback.
It should be. It should be.
All right, go ahead, Arika. Finish the train of thought. We apologize.
That's okay. I think that movies like this help us remember that these were children that were victimized by the system, and whereas that system was dead set on portraying them as animals and criminals that were wilding out in the city, I think it's important that this movie reminds us that they were children, they had families, their lives will never be the same again. And one of the reasons why it's important to tell these stories is, in my research, even though I couldn't finish the movie, I wanted to learn as much as I could about the topic. They go on to say that after Donald Trump posted that $85,000 article in 5 newspapers or whatever, basically calling for the heads of these children, that someone was like, there was an African American woman who was raped and tortured and thrown from the roof of a building, and she received none of the media attention that this Central Park jogger received. And that just highlights that it was 90% about the race of the jogger and 10% about the horrific nature of the crime. Because can you imagine being thrown from a roof and surviving and no one cares, while a similar situation has erupted into a media frenzy where this woman is writing books and she's a national speaker, and these children are being thrown under the bus because we've got to solve this crime. We've got to, make sure that young white women can jog in Central Park. Meanwhile, this woman was thrown from the roof of a building. We don't know if her crime was ever solved. We don't know how hard they investigated it. Apparently, Trump went to visit her and pledged to pay her medical bills. No one knows if he did or not. But she's one of those unspoken faces.
He's a known liar, so I would safely assume that didn't happen. You know,
I'm going to
Right. Well, what
safely
money?
agree with you. I'm going to safely
What
agree
money
with
he
you.
paying it?
Well,
Yeah.
he might have
yeah.
included in one of his bankruptcies. But we don't know. But the thing is, it's like without someone telling our stories, without someone humanizing us, we're going to continue to be placed in this category where, like you said, it's easy to write off our deaths, write off our murders as something of like minimal importance. And with someone like her highlighting the significance of each life, not just the story, but each particular life, it kind of changes how the story is perpetuated in our society, I think.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the main thing that I take from what you just said is that our humanity is never respected. You know, the woman that and I heard about that story as well when I was researching this. To have that happen to her is just as brutal as what happened to I forget her name, Miley something Miley, the woman
Miley.
who was a central part. Yeah, her last name was
Right.
Miley. It was just as
Mhm.
just as brutal as what happened to her, and it deserved just as much attention. But we often see that. We often see what was it? There was the young white girl that came up missing overseas, and it was on the news every single day. And then
In
we had
Aruba.
yeah in Aruba, yeah,
Hmm.
and there was a time where there was like 6 or 7 black women, young black women who came up missing in DC, and nothing was said about it outside of the black media. And I think that's why it's important for us to continue to do what we do and to build this movement because we care, And going back to what Dr. LaFleur said last week, the reason why this was so powerful and the reason why it was so hard for us to watch is because we know that we're not safe. We're not safe out here. Even in 2019, this could happen to one of our children, God forbid. It could happen to one of us. And we could come up missing, and outside of our family and friends, nobody would care. Somebody could harm us, and nobody would care. And somebody could falsely accuse us of something, and they would look at us like we're an animal. And that still goes on to this day. So definitely, Rick, I think the humanity piece, we need to continue to tell this because it humanizes these men who were boys when this happened to them. I mean, see, what do you think? I mean, I remember back in the day, I can't remember. I think it was 40 Years a Slave. Is that the name of the movie? 40 Years a Slave. And Snoop Dogg came out. Snoop Dogg said, We tired of slave movies. We tired of
12 years
hearing
a
it."
slave.
12
Yeah,
years was
12
out, man.
years.
I was
Yeah.
way off. I mean 40-year-old version and the slave. You know what I'm saying?
Listen, I was right there with you. I was
Hey,
like,
Yeah.
right,
yeah,
right.
yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. That's I'm on some BDSM, you know what I'm saying? 40 years a slave, I'm tripping. But anyway. Um, see, you remember when Snoop said that? And he was like, "We tired of seeing slave movies," and
Yeah.
a lot of people co-signed. And at the time, I did too.
Yeah, I was
But
at the
I
time I did
realized
too.
that, yeah, but we got to keep telling these stories. You know what I'm saying? What do you think?
So, like I said, at the time, I kind of agreed with him. It was like they were just running them so, back to back. They love to show the movies where we're being oppressed versus, the
Mhm.
movies where we're not. So I get what he was saying, but I think that's a little bit different than this situation because even though, like, we all know we still have slavery to this day, but it's in different forms. What happened to those, kids, those young boys? In New York, like that's happening all across the country, and has happened since then. So I think it's really important that we tell their story at a national level, so our kids know like kind of what they're looking for and what to face. I mean, there's not a whole lot they can do to avoid it, but I know just as a mother, having 3 sons, like every time they leave or go somewhere, you don't talk to them for a while, you're just wondering like what could happen. Like that's the fear that you have, and I always tell my, kids, make sure there's always another somebody else with you. So you always have, in my head, I'm thinking like a witness or an alibi, so no one can falsely accuse you of anything. But look what happened in this situation. One kid was just going down there with his friend, so he wasn't scared. And next thing you know, he's arrested too. So it didn't
Yeah,
really help
Corey
that
Wise.
situation. Yeah,
Yeah.
so it didn't help. It's not going to help in every situation, but I just always think that it's better. But I guess, to kind of make a long story short, this is something that we're still facing. That's still a fear that we have every single day in America. So that's important to get her story out. And I agree. I want to support her. So even if I don't watch it, I'm gonna pull it up on Netflix and let it play in the room, just so that
Yeah.
she gets her views.
Yeah,
And
I heard a lot of other people say that, and
yeah.
they said, "Well, I think I might just put it on play." And you know how like
Hmm.
when you watch Netflix and it just continues to play the episodes until it says, "Are
Yeah.
you still watching?" You may have
Uh-huh.
to come back. You may have to come peek and look. You know what I'm saying? Is it still playing? And then hit play, and
Yeah.
let it
And then
go.
bounce.
Yeah, but I think and I got this from Roland Martin. It's important that we do continue to support this type of work because I know firsthand that they're outside of the actors. It was outside of the police and the attorneys that were putting them in jail. They were all black, some Hispanic. A lot of people behind the scenes were black, and we have to push through this and power through this to support them because the views, the clicks, the ticket sales, all of that affects their ability to be more marketable, to get the funding and to get the backing to make more work like this. And if we don't have this, then we get more shows like hey, y'all seen that? There's this show right now, and I'm gonna look it up. And I'm sorry, we live. Normally we can look things up and edit it or whatever, but y'all asked to be live, so we live. But there's this show where there's a movie out where this white man was supposed to be some sort of radio host, and he couldn't make it as a white radio host. And so what he did was he started imitating a ghetto black woman. So he was, it was basically like,
Yeah.
you watch the old blackface movies where
Right.
it was
Right.
white men and they were talking in a way. I'm not going to not try to do it, but um, we need our shows to be successful to cancel out and counterbalance nonsense like that. And I'll figure it out and I'll put it in the chat for everybody to see. But
you
that's why
know,
it's important to continue to support them. But go ahead, Lab, hop in, man.
no, that's very important for the stories to be told. But I think doubly important is that it's told from us, from a black perspective, a black point of view,
Right.
because you could tell that same story in any of these great directors, that they talk about, and they wouldn't have had the same impact. It wouldn't have the same nuance that felt relatable to so many of us. It just wouldn't hit home. And so I think oftentimes, the stories are told, but they're watered down or they're told from the wrong perspective. Because think about it like this, honestly, when you look at the Central Park Five, if you look at their perspective or a perspective that historically has been put out, then what do you have? You would have had A Birth of a Nation, right? That's exactly the movie that sent America into a frenzy or helped. That was the one of the
Right.
early classics. And so that story of the
Mm-hmm.
Central Park Five could have been told from that same narrative. So I'm definitely grateful that she was actually able to capture a little more of the proper perspective, and that's really what we need to do is just keep supporting the perspectives from our perspective. I don't want to see. I never saw 12 Years a Slave. Honestly, I was kind of with like you guys. I was tired of seeing that too. So I really can't comment on
You
it, but
know, what was 12 Years a Slave? Was that made by? Was
no, I think it
obviously it
was.
had
I
black
think it
actors
was
in
made
it.
by a black dude. I think I'm not sure,
I have no
Okay.
idea.
I haven't
or it
watched
might
it
have been
either.
directed by. I put it to you like that. Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. I and the woman's name is Trisha Miley, the woman who was the the woman attacked in the park by Mateus Reyes. Um, I definitely agree with you. We need it told from our perspective, because it makes it that much more impactful, because she dropped so many different nuggets about what affects Black life, on a daily basis. Not only did she talk about police harassment, she talked about racism in the police department. We still got that right now. We know that law enforcement has been infiltrated by white supremacists. She talked about mass incarceration. You know, we talked about a 16-year-old being sent to an adult prison. We talked about how she talked about how the prison industrial complex is a hustle, and it preys on poor people. You know, she
Yep.
talked about how, like, okay, if I want to talk to him, it's $20 for 10 minutes, and these people are barely struggling to survive. They can't just trick off 20 minutes. I mean, one guy, Raymond Santana, his dad was able to talk to him and stay in his son's head to try to keep him motivated. But they talk about that. That still goes on to this day. You know, we just saw a story, on the Man Listen show, where on our Facebook page, where they're talking about getting away. They're talking about doing away with in-person contact, because they're saying that it's a security risk, and some industry, some corporation has video chat that people can do with their family. Now, on the surface, you can say, all right, instead of having to travel 200, 300 miles to go and see somebody, I can just do it from home. But they're being overcharged, right? Just like they are with the phones, but they're being overcharged. And they talked about how the signal is crappy, and it's just more more predatory practices being put on poor people. And Ava highlighted that. She talked about transphobia. When you talked about Corey Wise's sister, his sister was his brother, and became a trans woman, and it talked about her plight and how she was killed. She was killed in that, and for those of you that haven't watched it, I sort of dropped the spoiler, but you can look it up and see it. But his brother became a trans woman, and that was a person who had a strong impact on his life. So while he was going through hell in jail, that memory of his sister was in his head, and they bring him in and say, your sister was killed because she was a trans woman. So it's just things like that she was able to blend in and to weave into this story that really just highlighted that we aren't safe. We aren't safe, and this is still going on to this day. When you look at everything that they talked about in the show, it's still going on to this day, and that's why so many of us don't want to watch this. Like, I look at the movie Precious and all the dysfunction in that. I've never watched Precious, because in my mind, that's a horror movie. I don't want to see that, and I understand why people don't want to see this. Go ahead, you can hop in, Rick. I see you chomping at the bit.
I think the other important thing is that the impact that this movie has made on the participants in what happened to the Central Park Five. So to see Linda Fairstein have to withdraw from her boards, to see her life negatively impacted by what she did to these children so many years ago. She's been living her life just as pleasantly and wonderfully as if she was just she's a successful novelist, as they describe her. Her life has gone on unblemished, and she still stands on the fact that, well, just round up every Black kid in New York City and they're a potential suspect. And her life has gone on perfectly. But to see now that because of this movie and the impact that Ava's movie has had on the public, that now Linda is receiving the same type of negative feedback, not the same type, but just some type of negative impact. Because I mean, of course, we would all like to see her do a couple days in Rikers or whatever, but to see her life negatively impacted by some of the decisions that
I
she's
like to
made.
see her do the exact amount of time they did. That's what I would like to see. That would be justice. I would like them to see the police that were involved, the judge, everybody that basically put this sham trial into place and ruin these young men's lives. I like to see them. I'd like to see all kind of justice come to them, because it was horrible what they did to those young men. But go ahead. I'm sorry I interrupted you.
No, that's fine. I think that it's reasonable to want to see justice. And when you see a miscarriage of justice and you see the impact that it had on these children, it's fair to want to see the people that inflicted that pain and punishment on these innocent children. It's fair to want to see that, inflicted on their lives. And so I think it's great that she's had to withdraw from all her boards and everything else, and she's all up in arms. Now, mind you, I read that she declined to, be interviewed by Ava. She wanted final script approval as if she still has some type of authority over Black people's narrative of what happened. She wanted final script approval as though she could just come in and say, no, change what they said because I don't agree with that. Well, that's what you did in the interrogation room. You changed what they said and you still want to do that to this day. And now you don't want to own up to it. Well, it's like final reckoning. And I'm glad that it's come upon her. I think that's another positive thing from these movies is that it causes the public to take a second look at these people. Like I'd like to see the fact that the woman that falsely accused Emmett Till is still alive. I'd like to see her sitting in jail. I think somebody should
Yep.
haul that granny on off to the
Yeah.
last cell at the corner of Rikers Island. I think she should die there, personally.
Do
There
you know?
was
Do
a
you know how many?
petition to get
Yeah.
her arrested. I don't know what happened with it, or
Well, white
sounds like
supremacy happened. They're gonna protect her. But do you know how many lives were ruined by that woman? That woman
but
that falsely accused Emmett Till, because
We'll,
Emmett
we'll
Till
never know.
sparked Emmett Till sparked the civil rights movement. That's when they were like, that's enough. Y'all didn't kill this boy. Y'all didn't took him out of his home and brutalized him and murdered him. That's enough. And I think that speaks to us today because that's still happening to us. Trayvon, Mike Brown, and we get mad, we organize, but what's really changing? It happens for we march and we protest, and then it comes back to just being normal. So I guess, and I think that just solidifies the point, reinforces the point that we had to keep telling these stories. Like, I'll be honest with you, even though I powered through this one, I didn't watch the Khalif Browder miniseries or documentary. I couldn't watch it. I didn't watch the Trayvon documentary. I couldn't watch it. It was too much, and so I don't begrudge anybody that said, you know what, I'm gonna check out, and I'm not gonna be able to watch this one right here. So what, Lab, go ahead. You about to hop in.
No, I was gonna echo what you said about uh Trayvon. I didn't there's really no need for me to watch it, because I recall all that. I'll be honest, the Central Park Five, I was younger, so I don't recall all the details. I do remember hearing about it and stuff like that. So I actually did learn something from watching the docu-series, actually.
Yeah, yeah, and it does enlighten us. And what do you think about showing this to your children? We talked about our fear for our children, something like this happening to them. You know, Laugh, hop in because you finished it. Do you think it's appropriate? I mean, I got a 16-year-old son, and I told him that he needs to watch it. Just because you need to learn what happens. You saw
Right,
you
right,
when you see how, like, you could just go home. You can go home. Just tell us this, and then you can go home. And when those boys were crying, like when Raymond Santana, when his dad came in and he
hmm
saw what they had coerced him into saying, he was like, "What? What?" And
right.
his kid was like, "No, Dad, let it go. I can go home. I can go home." You look at Antron McCray,
McCray,
and
yeah.
his dad was so shook because they brought up, "Hey, you got a good job now, right?
hmm
You're doing good." And he had been in prison, so he felt as if he was protecting his son, and really
Right.
he ended up selling his son down the river. And the guilt, they showed the guilt. They did a real good job of showing the guilt that he lived with, and how that affected his relationship with his son. So, I mean, as a parent, do you think this is appropriate for somebody, a young man, a young woman to watch?
I would think that, yeah, you definitely need to, obviously there's a threshold of, maybe if you got a 6-year-old kid, maybe not quite that young or anything like that, but especially if you got a 16-year-old, for sure, because he's older than all those guys. And so, like you said earlier, but for the grace of God, that could be you, or me, or any of our friends, or anything like that. So he's at the point where he definitely should be know what could happen, know what has happened. And that's not even that long ago. I mean, 1989, this isn't something that happened in 1912. This isn't something that happened in 1945. This is 1989. So they definitely need to know. And as we're talking about their parents, that's something else that actually stood out to me is going back to the counseling or support for the families. A lot of them, after the fact, they felt so bad because they felt like they let their kids down. And then what's the guy that played the trumpet? His sister, she
Kevin, I
was
think,
hard on herself.
Kevin.
Kevin.
Yeah.
She was hard on herself, because she was the one who came down to the station with him. And so that's another reason that we should tell our kids, is because those parents, I think, in 89 had a false sense of we've made great progress in the US, we made great strides and things like that. And so they were trusting the system. And here we are 30 years later, we have to tell them you can't trust it right now. We're in 2019, yes, but you still can't trust the system. Like we said, all these black kids are in the same situation today.
And I think, and y'all can jump in after this, but that's exactly why I don't share and like those videos where they show the little kids, pop locking and dancing with the
Now,
police and all that.
in school,
I,
yeah, man.
no, yeah,
Or black teacher
I don't go
school
for
or
none of
whatever.
that.
Yeah.
Don't go asking them for no football cards. You remember they used to hand out, go to the
They
sheriff and ask
did,
for
man. They
football
did.
cards. Yeah, you know what I'm saying.
I
And
still got some, actually. I ain't gonna
yeah,
lie.
right.
Yeah,
You
I still got a
got the
couple.
Deron Cherry or the Derek Thomas, Chiefs football card
Carlos
back
Carson,
in the
dog. I
day.
got Carlos
Right.
Carson,
So
man.
that's a no for me, dog.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do they
But
even still
that's the
do that?
thing. I don't know, and I sure hope my kids don't know, because you got to realize they ain't your friend. I saw, and I think we haven't, as parents, you just want your child to come home. You just want your child to come home, and it's tough because you want them to be a man, you want them to be a young woman, you want them to be a human, and to be able to stand up for their rights and speak to their rights. But you also want them to come home. So it's like, just comply. It's comply, get through the situation and get home. But that still doesn't make you safe. That don't make you safe. You still get kicked in the head. You still could get shot in the back. And, it's just, it's this movie just brought out all those emotions, and I get caught up about it because, like I said, I have children. I got a son. I got young men who are his friends, nephews, and it could happen to any of us. And this generation, for as many problems that they have in terms of like being millennials, they represent the best of us. And if we don't do what we can to protect them and to guide them in the best way, we're failing them. So I think they should watch this. It should be talked about. Now it should be watched with guidance, right? You should talk about it and help them process it. But I don't think this is something that we should keep from our children. See what you think.
My 16-year-old asked, or he was talking about it, saying he was going to watch it. And I told him to wait until I watched it, just only because I know they were saying that, they had to bring on, it was a counselor, a psychiatrist, psychologist, it was somebody onto the set
Yeah,
watching
they
it.
brought they had therapy for everybody that was involved,
Yeah.
for the production and the actors, because it was such a
Yeah.
so heavy that they knew, like, the guy that played, I think his name is Jarrell. Matter of fact, let me look up his name. The young man that played Corey Wise, and if you
Yeah,
watch
did a
the
good
show,
job.
he did an excellent job. He played young Corey and adult Corey as well, and he talked about in the article, he's still haunted by playing that role. He's still haunted about what happened to him. So it definitely, the mental health piece, and I'm sorry to cut you off, but her foresight into saying, listen, I got to take care of these people. because they're doing this work is it was very important. But go ahead, say I'm sorry.
No, that's what I was gonna say. So I told him to wait just because, I knew she had brought people in. I've never heard anybody doing that before. And they may have, but just, maybe it just has been nationally known. And so I figured if it was, that impactful, he needed to wait until I watched it and then I could watch it with him. Now, he's 16, he's hard headed. Who knows? He probably has already knocked out the series, but he hasn't said anything to me. But I think it's important for them to actually see it so they can, as a parent, when we tell them, be careful when you go out, do this and do not do this. And, especially when, they are young black males and they live in predominantly white neighborhoods. You can't do the same thing your white friend does, and then the reasons why. And so, and he actually, there's a situation where he had a friend that was falsely accused of something, and so he kind of knows firsthand. And the only reason that friend got out of everything is because a girl who had falsely accused him of it, ran her mouth and was sending text messages to her friend. That friend and her parents actually drove down to the police station and he was released from jail. But had that friend not have been a stand-up person, or that girl not have been dumb enough to send those text messages, that boy probably would have, did some type of jail time over something like this. And so, like I said, that's a personal friend that he knew. A boy had played on the same basketball team, lived right around the corner for us. And so it was unfortunate. So he's kind of, my son has seen it firsthand, but not nearly at this extent of the Central Park Five. But
Yeah, and unfortunately, my son dealt with the same thing. You know, the police brought him in school. They brought him in school and tried to intimidate him and tried to get him to be a witness against one of his friends because a young girl that did not look like my son or his friend accused his friend of pushing her and bruising her arm. And despite there not being evidence, despite it only being his word versus hers, that young man had to do time. He went to jail. He went to jail, and he had to, he had to do house arrest, and it could have been a lot worse, but he had to go through it, and he could have been another Antron McCray, could have been another Kevin Richardson, Raymond Santana, Yusuf Salam, Corey Wise. That we could have been saying his name just like we said their names. So, Arika, I mean, I know you got a young son just like we do. What do you think? Are you going to watch it with him? Are you going to try to let him watch it and then answer any questions? What's going to be your approach?
So my husband watched it with him a little bit last night, and then he apparently started over from the beginning to catch up. So I guess I'll just have to have a little conversation with him later, but it's kind of reminiscent because we live in the St. Louis area of when Mike Brown was killed, and I had to have that conversation with him when he was much younger, and he was like really upset and worried that the police were going to kill him. And I felt like I stole a little bit of his youth and innocence at that time, but I felt like it was necessary. And I feel like this is that same thing, even though we have to steal a little bit of our children's innocence, which is unfair to them and which is something that other races don't have to deal with necessarily. It's necessary in order for our children to be better prepared for the world that we're entering them into. And especially like you said, living in a predominantly white neighborhood, he has to be aware that he cannot do the same things that his friends can do. He cannot behave the same way that his friends can behave. And the fact that my child is a baby to me, but he's 5'10", 5'11", and wearing a size 12 shoe, he's not a baby out there in the world to them. He's a black man out in the world. And until you hear him speak, or until you hear his, childlike reasoning, you might not you, because we understand each other and that these are children, but the world might perceive him as an adult and put him in the situations that he shouldn't be in. And so it's important for our children to see movies like this, to understand that we're not exaggerating these situations. We're not exaggerating our concern for your well-being. What we're doing is explaining to you situations that we have seen firsthand, that we have experienced firsthand, and that we are trying our very best to shield you from. Can we shield you from it 100%? No. Can we lead you into the world without making you aware of it and still be responsible parents? No. So we got to find that middle ground that we feel comfortable with, where you're aware of these situations and we feel like we've trained you how to act in these situations. And that's crazy to think about. We're training our children on how to behave in the world that we know is dead set on finding them guilty of something. And then we're hoping that they can still be children and find joy and love and life in this world. And it's unfair. It's unfair to us to have these worries about, like C said, we just want you to come home. Like, it's just, we just want you to come home. So
And,
yeah, you might be right.
that's the
Go ahead.
go ahead. I'm sorry.
I was like,
No, finish your thought. I'm sorry for interrupting.
you might be right in the situation, but like I tell my clients, you could be right all day. You're not going to convince that police officer that you're right. The only thing that you're going to do is make him more mad. Convince the judge that the officer was wrong. Don't try to convince the police officer that he was wrong. Just comply and make it home and state your case later. Go ahead.
Yeah. And you talk about our children, and you look at Tamir Rice. Tamir Rice is 12 years old. 12 years old when the police just pulled up and blew him away. And for people to try to rationalize it because he was 12, I think he was like 5'8", 5'9". And they said, well, hey, look at him. Look how big he was. We thought he was grown. It just goes back to the dehumanization of our children. You see it with our young black women, how they're over sexualized as young women, and you see it happen to our young men. And we could probably go on all night and another day talking about this. But I think we hit a lot of topics. We hit a lot of good topics, and I want to thank everybody who watched. We competing with the NBA Finals. I think part of the crew was watching it while we talking, but I want to thank everybody for our first
Who's
show.
winning? Who's winning?
I don't know. I was kind of trying
tell
to.
us. You was watching it live.
Yeah, exactly.
You do look like you tuned in, lad.
Right. Yeah, I looked at him. He was zoned out. I was like, man, Lab's really intent on the show, and I was like, nah, he ain't intent on the show. Yeah,
we do need to be warriors out here, guys. We do need to be warriors.
Yeah. But I want to thank everybody for watching our first broadcast. Now, I'll be honest with you. We ain't gonna do this every time. We ain't going live every time, because we ain't paying to get lined up, trying to be fresh, and sometimes we just go record and we're gonna bring you that heat, and you're gonna check us out on the podcast. But I think this was a good opportunity for us to talk about a topic that is been all through social media this week, and I think it's very relevant. And I really want to tip my hat to Ava DuVernay, to all the people that worked on the project, and we call them the Central Park Five, but I've heard people give them a different name. They're the exonerated five, because they were exonerated and they're innocent. So Yusuf Salam, Corey Wise, Kevin Richardson, Raymond Santana, Antron McCray, much respect to you. And I hope that that the money that you received, it can't give you back your life. It can't give you back your childhood that was stolen from you. But what they meant for evil, God meant for good. And your story will help us prepare our children to be better prepared for when something like this happens to them. And hopefully they don't have to go through the same hell that you went through. So I salute those brothers, and I want to thank my crew members. And I thank everybody that watches the show. Make sure you follow us on Facebook. Make sure you follow us on Twitter. Make sure you follow us on Instagram at Man Listen Show. Come back to this show and like the show. As we get more likes, we can do more for the show. And listen to us on SoundCloud. We'll go ahead and post a playback of this on SoundCloud, iTunes, and everywhere else. And we'll holler at you next time. Peace.
Peace. And shout out to Ava. Keep doing the good work.
Local elections matter, man. For real.
R.I.P. Spanky.